My name's Gordon Kriebel. I'm, along with my wife Sue and I, we're the owners of Park Valley Pet Eatery. Any new people here, or people that we just started coming here? Awesome. Okay, great. Thanks. We've just begun to offer a lot more seminars this year. This one, of course, is about cats, and thanks for coming out. Okay, so I'm gonna start a little bit with just laying the groundwork for cats and what makes cats different creatures, and I'm sure this may be not so new information to a lot of you, but regardless, maybe we'll just do it quick and go through it. A cat is cats came and were domesticated in Egypt, I guess, so they've been with people a long time. So now they are really an arid creature, and they're supposed to their diet, the ideal diet for a cat is a mouse, you know. A mouse is an ideal diet for a cat. It's 80% water. Yeah,
mouse flavored.
Right.
Canned food.
So I mean,
you never know.
Yeah, I mean, and if there isn't anything like mouse in a can, you know, or I guess I've seen companies online selling frozen mice for feeding to cats. I mean, I saw a Western Pennsylvania company that does that, and I thought that was previously only done for snake feeding, but I mean, I've looked at that and I've seen that's available out there now. But with that in mind, you know, a cat is supposed to intake a lot of its dietary needs through protein, and there's great evidence for that. The cat is also supposed to get its water from its food. Okay, so there's a huge departure from that when you look at what's available out there, you know, in grocery store shelves. And I brought some things, and we probably can, between Chris and I, when we're talking tonight, we can go through these things and just tell you what to avoid, you know. And I'm just not trying to target anybody. I selected in one trip to the grocery store just some things that I wanted to show that maybe you guys shouldn't be feeding, okay? But that's, you know, that's something that we need to talk about too. So the evidence about how to feed a cat kind of comes down to the things that you see, and you know, there's great physical evidence about that. A cat has a short and acidic gastrointestinal tract, and that by definition defines them as a carnivore. Okay, they also have sharp teeth. Okay, they don't have grinding teeth. They can't chew up a pretzel like this gentleman's doing right here. Not very well.
I can do it very well.
He does it good. Now the
Obviously not a cat.
Oh, wow, I'm glad to know.
Right. And that's it. No, there's more. So I guess with the evidence of that, and there's also another missing part of, you know, with cats, there's no amylase, which is a digestive enzyme in their saliva. So a cat can't digest and break down grains in their mouth. So that's great evidence to suggest that we shouldn't be feeding our cats these things. I mean, their intestinal tract isn't made to support it. Their chewing and their digestive enzymes isn't there to support it. And you know, and it's not anything to do with their ancestral diet. So the evidence is kind of overwhelming to steer folks away from stuff like this. But this exists because it's easy, it's cheap, you know, and it has intense marketing behind it. You know, so this stuff is out there. All right,
Our store cat is showing off a little bit.
She climbs those
She's
racks.
trying to find a comfy place to sleep.
She's selling the bed.
She found it.
That's
Yeah.
great.
All right, so I mean, obviously, carbohydrates need to be broken down with the amylase, that enzyme that I said the cats are lacking. And so without that present, so the evidence points towards a meat predominant. All right, well, this is more entertaining.
She said maybe not.
So the evidence points towards meat predominant diet with low carbs and basically low in grains. So, so the appropriate ways to feed a cat as Christian represents here, the Waruva company, one of the really classically good ways to feed a cat, because
She will like that. Hold on.
this has that kind of moisture balance. It's like 80% water here in the can. So you have the moisture balance, you know, it's close to that same level of moisture that would be in a natural mouse, you know. So
Okay.
But you can't do that.
no, there's no way. Yeah, she's really acrobatic, but anyway, so with in mind, you know, canned food is certainly one of the acceptable ways you can feed. Now, not just any canned food, but as Chris discusses his food, maybe we'll pick on some of the normal canned foods, and there's things there you want to avoid, most definitely. Okay? So a canned food can have hidden ingredients in there, and maybe not so hidden, but just ingredients in there that are not desirable. So a canned food is one of the ways. There are several dry kibble foods out on the market. Again, the grocery branded items are not in the mix in protein. There's way too much carbohydrate. There's a lot of grain. There's a lot of starch. There's a lot of things they can't utilize in there. So we dissuade people from this. And I also want to point out, like in dry feeding, a lot of folks will typically put a bowl of food out and just allow their cats to feed free choice. And we don't recommend that either. That leads to overfeeding. And I think if you control the amount of the dry kibble, ideally, I think in a feeding plan, I would limit this dry food. In our household, Sue and I feed 2 cats. Well, we have 3 cats. I should tell you our cats' names. We have Oliver, Isabel, and Henry. Okay, and so the 3 cats. 2 of them are males that have had struvite crystals. If all of you wear that, or some may not be. Yeah. Okay, so 2 of them we took home because we were nursing them back from health because of struvites. And, well, actually, one of them, that was the case, and the other one just was a dry kibble eater. And I just want to caution you about that, because they will tend to be dehydrated. They're just eating dry food. Okay, so that's one of the big cautionary things. If you can limit your dry food to like 25% or less of the diet, I think that's a good practice. So kibble food, if it's low in carbohydrates, is okay, but just try to limit, you know, overall what you're doing there. Especially if there's cats in there that aren't good drinkers, because they could easily become dehydrated. They could be much more predisposed to that struvite crystal formation, which happens with the urinary tract, and then it develops into that. It kind of sort of metabolizes from a urinary tract infection, so that's what it sets in first. But moisture helps to keep them away from that. So, all right. So canned food, dry food in moderation, and the right type. Raw food, which we will discuss in length. There are many choices, but raw food is very, very good for cats. Has the moisture, has the meat predominance, has the low carbohydrates. Perfect match to a cat. There is a line that one of our seminars in March will discuss called Stella and Chewy's. It's a freeze-dried raw food for cats. Also very good. Rehydrate it, feed it with lots of moisture. The elements that we want to explain to you tonight are good choices and bad choices. These are obviously good choices, and we're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of the seminar, so I wanted to let Chris come over and have his speak about what makes this a quality food and what's, you know, really good about his product line. Thanks for coming out, Chris.
Thanks.
Yep.
I'm Chris. I represent Waruva, but more importantly, you know, just to go into what he was talking about as far as Gordon was talking about nutrition. Carbohydrates, everybody familiar with the grain-free buzz?
The what?
Grain-free. Like, everybody's like grain-free, 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 grain-free.
Yeah.
Lay's potato chips are grain-free. Twizzlers are grain-free. When it comes to a cat, you really need to worry about carbohydrates. Like you mentioned about amylase, they're unable to digest carbohydrates. So if you're unable to digest carbohydrates, what happens? They get stored as fat. When they get stored as fat, what happens? You wind up with a diabetic cat.
Obese and diabetic.
Obese and diabetic. So now you wind up going on some other kind of diet, you're at the vet's office, so on and so forth. So first and foremost, you need to eliminate carbohydrates and try to in as much as you can. Limiting kibble is absolutely huge. As a manufacturer and a company, we almost recommend no kibble.
Meaning dry food?
Dry food.
A lot of people do, yeah, and I think that at least limiting it is reasonable.
Limiting is reasonable, even though there are so many manufacturers out there that make dry kibble that is grain free. It's still binded with something, and a lot of them are binded with potatoes. So you still need to limit the kibble because potatoes are carbohydrate.
What about for kittens? We have 3 adult cats and we have a 3-month-old cat.
You don't need kitten food. It's marketing.
Okay, so they don't need the carbohydrates to grow.
No.
They've
Okay.
got the same dietary
It seems like he
needs as
eats
an
and eats and
adult
eats and
cat.
doesn't get any
If
bigger.
he was out in the wild,
Yeah.
he would kill and eat mice.
A good
He
point.
wouldn't eat potatoes.
Our feeding
All right.
our feeding requirements don't. We usually suggest with kittens. I don't even know if it says it on our can, but we usually you bump up the feeding. We say 1 ounce per pound. You go about to 1.5 ounce per pound. You feed them a little bit more,
Okay.
but you feed them a little bit more of a clean diet. You know, not one that's rich in carbohydrates.
They're a very young family as much as they'll eat.
Another interesting thing is that when you feed a cat a diet that is just protein and moisture, a miracle happens. Their urine pH comes out at about 6.5, which is perfect. Now, some people will ask, well, what do you put in the food to get the urine pH so perfect? I mean, you have to sit there and go to the vet, and they got to put the prescription and this and that. What makes it perfect? You give the cat what it needs. It needs meat and lots of moisture. Give it meat, give it moisture, good urine pH. Another thing that attributes to that is your ash content, your magnesium, your calcium, and your phosphorus. You need to make sure those levels are extremely low. Typically, we're like, for example, this can of food, our ash content's about 1.2. There's a lot of manufacturers out
You guys
there.
know what ash is? If I might interject, do you get everybody know what ash is? Maybe that'd be good to say. It's
Ash is
mineral-
simply burnt bone. It's burnt bone and minerals.
it's a mineral content measure.
As us as a manufacturer, we sit there and use boneless, skinless white breast meat as our for our chicken. Okay, all of our fish is hand cut off the bone. So what does that mean? That means that you're not going to have bone in the food. If you don't have bone in the food, you're able to sit there and record numbers that are very extremely low in ash, calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. Because your calcium, your magnesium, your phosphorus is what bones are made of. And that's what rises the levels of ash, and that's what leads to crystals.
So most grocery store bought food is just the leftovers, whatever, bone, carcasses that they ground up.
It's a matter of what they're sourcing. The definition, the AFCO definition, if you see chicken, just chicken is the first ingredient.
Mhm.
The AFCO definition of chicken is the clean combination of flesh, skin, and bone with or without accompanying bone.
All right.
That's what controls and governs the pet food industry.
Okay.
So that being the definition by AFCO, okay, that means that the chicken could contain 99% bone or 3% bone. But they're not required to say how much bone is in the chicken that they're putting in the food.
Okay.
Obviously, the chicken with more bone content costs less.
And has more
Chicken
ash.
with it's going to add up to ash. And a lot of times you're not going to see ash listed on the cans. It's not because there's no ash in it. It's because
But
they're just not
required,
proud
if
of
it
the
came from
number.
a chicken, they can list it as chicken.
You're not proud of the number, you don't put it on the can. You're not required to put it on the can. You're not required to put calcium, magnesium, phosphorus. The only thing you're really required to put on that can is your protein number, your fat number, your moisture number, your